Your children are growing up, but so are you. And that is okay.
You know that moment when the day finally quiets down and instead of relaxing, your brain gets louder? The questions start showing up. Why am I so tired? Why does my anxiety feel different than it used to? Why does my life look fine but feel off? You don't have time to think about it during the day, so it waits for you at night. This is What the Shift, the podcast for those 2 a.m. thoughts you keep trying to ignore. The ones about exhaustion, people-pleasing, overfunctioning, boundaries, changing bodies, shifting identities, and the quiet realization that nothing is wrong, it just can't keep going the same way. I'm Gia Lacqua, and if it's been keeping you up at 2 a.m., it's trying to tell you something. Welcome to What the Shift. If you've been having conversations with yourself at 2 a.m., you are in the right place. Welcome back to What the Shift. I'm your host, Gia Lacqua. Today, I am so excited to introduce you to Nitza Jimenez. Nitza is a parent and family coach with over a decade of experience working across education, community health, and family engagement. She supports parents, especially those raising tweens and teens, who want to navigate values, communication, and emotionally charged conversations without repeating patterns of control, silence, or shame. Drawing from her lived experience as a second-generation immigrant and her professional work with families across diverse cultural and generational contexts, Nitza helps adults notice what parenting brings up in them and how to learn to respond with awareness rather than self-abandonment. Nitza, so happy to have you join us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here and just have a conversation.
Yes. Well, I mean, quite literally, the most important job in the world is parenting, right? And,
A
and
100%.
probably the hardest too. So tell us before we jump in, tell us a little bit about your backstory and kind of what led you to the work that you're doing today.
So I have always worked with kids. Even when I was a teen, I was babysitting, I was tutoring, all the things. And then I became an educator. And in that moment, a lot of parents were just asking me for advice. And I was just like, what? Why are you coming to me? Like, I don't know. I don't have kids of my own. I'm just teaching them, you know? And then I realized, wait, they're coming to me because I've been educated. I'm an educator. I know how their brains work. So I just started doing research on parenting in general. I started doing all workshops at our school, and just supporting in every way I could. From there, I did a lot of leadership roles in the school setting. And then I moved to West Palm Beach, and there I became a community health educator. I decided that working with the parents did make a bigger impact in children's lives in general, and I didn't have to deal with the red tape of the education system.
Mhm.
But that's a different conversation. And there is where I got to work with a bunch of parents, specifically on communication. I did a bunch of presentations. I worked with about 250 of people. And a lot of the same things came up. It's just the fear of having certain taboo conversations with them and not understanding how to let go of the past, because some of their parents either were just reactive or avoid it, and they're just like, and then my kids are learning these things 100% on of the time they're on social media. They're learning all the time. I don't know how to navigate it. So it's like, okay, I'm hearing these things consistently. How can I help them translate the the emotions to these conversations with their kids?
I love that. I love that it sort of just became a very natural thing for you and you tapped into that. You really tuned into that instinct and that calling that, hey, people, this is a need that I can fill.
Yeah.
So that's incredible. Now, want to kind of set the foundation for the conversation. What you see in the work that you do with respect to key differences in generational parenting. So, what I mean by that is 30 years ago, 40 years ago, being raised by baby boomers looks very different than, let's say,
Yes.
millennials and Gen Xers who are raising their kids in today's world and today's environment. What are some of those key differences that you're seeing on your end?
A big difference is that the older generations, those boomers, were more about control. They didn't want to show emotions. They were very avoidant. And so the millennials, the Gen Xers were like, I have all these things to talk about, but I don't know how because my parents never modeled it, never showed me. And also there's more choice for us in these younger generations versus the older generation. Yeah, they did have the right to vote. They started working. They started having autonomy in those relationships, but then they were reacting to not having autonomy before. So they're just like, oh, well, I don't need this relationship anymore. I can divorce my husband or I could divorce my whoever, you know? And that kind of taught us Gen Xers, millennials, like, oh, we can just leave relationships, no problem. But is that really healthy? No, we need to learn how to be in certain relationships. Yes, abandon the unhealthy ones, of course, but we need to learn how to navigate with trust, communication, and teach that to our children. So now that we have this autonomy, full force, we have our own jobs, we have our own bank accounts, we don't have to be in a relationship necessarily. So, how can we stay healthy in those relationships and ensure that our children are also being healthy in their relationships with their friends, their boyfriends and girlfriends when they get them, and with themselves? How are they going to express self love? Where our parents, not maybe they did have that self love, but sometimes it was real toxic.
Yeah, or we didn't see it, right? Maybe it was there, but it
Yes,
wasn't visible to us.
exactly.
Yeah. So you raised so many good points in what you just said, which is that relationship, that foundational parent child relationship is so critical to every other relationship that child goes on to have, the one with themselves, the ones with friends, romantic partners, right down the road. So
Yeah.
I think that's a really important point. And I know you talk about in your work these inherited parenting extremes, and you touched upon them, but I want to dig into that a little bit more. So I'm oversimplifying this, but if I think about it on a spectrum, right, there's the sort of like you described it, more of the controlling parenting where
Mhm.
we don't like a behavior. What do we do as parents? Sometimes we squash it, or sometimes that's how we were raised. If parents didn't like the crying, the tantrum on the floor, they didn't like us having big emotions, their goal was to squash that. And then on the other hand, you have sort of the, I'm going to call it emotional abandonment, or sometimes it looks like silence, where to
Mhm.
your point, they're avoidant because they don't
Yeah.
know how to deal with their emotions. So talk to us about, kind of how we inherit different extremes and what we should be striving for instead.
That's a great question. So each family is gonna have their extremes, whether, like you said, that control, the silence, the avoidance. It's reflecting on yourself and how that came up in your upbringing. Did your parents ever talk about how to process grief? Did they ever talk about how to show the anger? Because all we all have emotions; they're all gonna come up. Did they just show the anger in snapping? Or did they say, hey, I'm really angry right now. I just need some time alone? How did your parents react to it? And what patterns from that are you still showing? Because I'm sure and I can't be the only one, but sometimes my parents come right out my mouth and I'm like, wait, where did that come from? So in those moments, think, was this a good reaction? Am I happy and proud of that? Come like that voice coming out? Or is it something that I need to reflect on? Why is it coming out? And how can I change it up a little bit to make it healthy for myself and my kid?
Yeah, you're definitely not alone. I can guarantee that. Yeah, so they become sort of ingrained, these patterns that we observed in
Yeah.
our family of origin. You said something important, which is how we process the emotions
Mhm.
and learning how to process the emotions. I'm gonna take that one step back and say,
Ok.
I think first, a core component of it, the processing is important, but I think naming I'm learning a lot as a
Yes.
parent, even and I follow a lot of different experts, parenting experts, therapists on social media. And what I hear consistently is just about like validating the feeling and how
Yes.
sometimes that is literally all the child needs is for you to be able to name what they're feeling because they can't and sit with it. right? And be comfortable with it. To your point, that could be the
Yeah.
processing. So I think, a part of it also is being able to acknowledge and name what's coming up for ourselves and then helping our kids to be able to label their feelings as well, which is hard
Yeah.
if you didn't learn that.
100%. And we also have to realize that all feelings, all emotions are healthy. Anger, depression, all of
Mhm.
them are part of who we are. It's how we express them that is not necessarily healthy. And that is where we need to be, yes, name them and be aware of them so we could change that reaction eventually. But it does, like you said, it does start with just acknowledging that it exists and it's here.
They're all valid, which I think also is not something many of us were taught to believe. We were taught to
Yes.
believe that some emotions are good and some are bad,
Yeah.
versus that they are all valid. They're all healthy. I think that's a very important reframe, especially for women, because in the work that I do with high achieving women, one common theme I see is a lot of women who mask. So I'm fine, it's fine, everything's fine. We say that a lot. And for different reasons. Sometimes it's we're not in a time or a place where we want to sit down and burden the other person with what we're actually
Yeah.
experiencing. Sometimes we're trying to tell ourselves we're fine. Sometimes we don't know even what we're feeling or how to deal with what we're feeling. So there's a lot of reasons for it. But I think one of the things I see is it does come back to what you learned, and,
Mhm.
and for a lot of us, it was women had to be sort of stoic and suppress their feelings and emotions, especially working women, women who wanted to be taken seriously because a lot of the times the message early on was don't be too emotional. Don't be
100%.
vulnerable, don't be emotional. And sometimes that can be our superpower, especially when you talk about tapping into emotional intelligence, which is a whole other episode. But I see that a lot in terms of, not fully expressing what we're feeling because and then that becomes like you named before, it becomes very ingrained in our patterns.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of my friend. She actually became a mother last year. It was really exciting. But her baby rolled off the bed for the first time and she freaked out,
Of course.
understandably
Of
so.
course.
Uh, she checked on her, did all the right thing, called the doctor. Everything was fine. She called her mom, which came over to support her. And she was starting to break down and crying. And her mom was just like, yeah, no, go to the room. You shouldn't be doing this in front of your daughter. She needs you to be strong. And she did. She followed her mom's direction, broke down, and came back all fine and stoic, like you said. But then we were talking later, and she was just like, I did what my mom said, but it didn't really feel right. Like, yeah, I know I shouldn't be crying in front of my kid, but like, I didn't know how to just turn it off. And I was like, but why can't you cry in front of your kid? Yes, I understand we shouldn't use them as our support system, but expressing sadness or fear and helping them regulate it or see us regulate it is very healthy. They're not going to know how to calm their tears if they're not seeing you calm yours.
Mhm.
And that goes even to teenager. Yeah, if we've had these patterns continuously their whole lives, it's going to be tougher to re-regulate and re-change those dynamics, but they do listen to us. They do see us as their, I don't want to say leaders in the sense of like a work leader, but at the end of the day, a parent is a leader and they follow. And yeah, it's going to be a little sassier when you're trying to transition these emotions, these patterns, but they're going to see you trying and they're going to start trying themselves.
100%. They're going to follow what you do, not what you say, just like a team at work. Yeah, it's a great point. You are their model. You are
Yeah.
their leader. Such a powerful point. And so, what you mentioned earlier about sometimes we hear our parents coming out of our own mouths and we're like, "Ooh, wait, where did that come from?" So for the people who are listening who are thinking, yeah, sometimes that happens. Sometimes something comes out of me and it doesn't really sound like me. Um, but they're mirroring the parts of themselves that, they were sort of were ingrained in their childhood. What advice would you give to those women listening who are thinking, yeah, sometimes I do default to those parenting strategies because that's how I was raised and I don't know any other way.
Give yourself grace. It's okay that those patterns come out. Sometimes we don't even notice that they're there until that moment that is just like, wow, I really said that. I really did that. it's okay to have had that reaction, and then going back and thinking back, like, what triggered that? How did that make me feel? How could my child feel? How did I feel when I was the child getting that? Like asking yourself these questions so you can process and come back and re-regulate. And it's okay to apologize to your child. That's fine. Like that's another lesson of self-reflection, self-accountability, and all of these things. And if it happens again, go back through that cycle. Yeah, I did this. It's fine. How am I going to improve it later? Did I change the words a little bit? Like, yeah, I was screaming, but I didn't curse that time. So it's like, whereas
Mhm.
give yourself that little, like I said, the grace, but recognition that you are improving and you are trying.
The repair, right, I think is so important, and many of
Yes.
us didn't necessarily grow up with that being modeled, so the fact that you could even have that conversation and apologize is a shift in of itself where you're
Yes.
taking on a new parenting model, and I think it does 2 things. 1, it helps with the repair in that moment between the parent and the child, but it also sets the example of how to repair with others when they make a mistake, as opposed to just digging their heels in the ground, stomping away, right?
Yes. And we've dealt with those people. It's not fun.
We have some of them in the offices we work in every day. Yeah, it's so interesting. And so, a lot of times I know it comes out that parents are reacting to a child's behavior based on what they're mirroring or the parts of themselves that they were taught to hide. So if the child is being loud or complaining, I saw a reel the other day that thought was really powerful, and it was about a kid saying, I'm bored. And you think, bored? How could you possibly be bored? Everything you have, everything I've given you, like I could never as a child say I was bored. And so sometimes, that becomes part of how we react or respond to our children. So how do we need to respond in those moments when the behavior is mirroring, parts of our own childhood?
We have to compare. Like, yes, we didn't have as much technology or as many maybe things available to us then as your child does now, but acknowledge that difference. It's just like if they've always been with tablets and TVs and literal just information 24/7. They
Mhm.
never just sat in just silence by
Yeah.
themselves. How are you expecting them to understand what to do in those moments if
Yeah.
they never had a downtime? Versus us, we did have downtime during thinking to the snowstorms right now. When we had snowstorms, we stayed inside. There's not much to do. We had to figure it out and have fun in our own ways.
Yeah.
For them, they had everything there all the time. So now there's no electricity. We didn't teach them how to be bored. So teach them how to be bored. Teach them like, hey, there's coloring books, there's audio books. Well, not audiobooks if your electricity is not working, but you understand what I mean. Help them navigate that boredom in a healthy way. And sometimes you could literally be like, it's okay to be bored. You'll have really great, inspiring thoughts in those moments.
Yeah.
You just have to wait.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. And then similarly, when we think about those emotional patterns that we've inherited,
Mhm,
and how they show up in our parenting, what does it look like to respond differently? Because I know for myself, I think about, okay, well, I don't want to repeat old patterns, right, that
mhm.
are extreme.
Yeah.
But I also, the alternative is I find myself overcompensating in some areas. So how do we find that balance? What does that look like?
I always go back to awareness. That's just me. It's being aware of that extreme. Like, how were we raised in those and in those moments, what didn't we like about it? What does it give us still an ick right now? And then to evaluate that extreme, be aware of the extreme you're going to. How is that showing up for your kid? Are they throwing tantrum? Is your teenager literally just shutting you out completely
Mm,
because you're not giving them a safe space to communicate with you?
yeah.
What is that? So what is the difference between what you got and what you're giving? And let's see if there's like a middle ground you can get to. And sometimes that is having a conversation with your kid, being like, hey, I have noticed this pattern with us. We're not really talking anymore like we used to. Is there some way I can support you? Is there something you think could help us rekindle this relationship a little bit? It's grace for you and your relationship with your kid and your past self. I know we're gonna get to extremes and on parts of us, but we're growing up. Your children are growing up, but so are you, and that is okay.
I love that. So are you. Aren't we all? We all are still in the process of growing up, no matter how old we are, because we're all still learning and still evolving, hopefully. So that is,
Yes.
it's such a great point. Yeah, I love that. And I think the other piece of that is the open, honest, transparent communications is kind of what I'm hearing you say, of being, problem solving together as
Yes.
opposed to, feeling like you as the parent have to have all the answers and have to be able to direct everything. Yes, you are the parent at the end of the day, and you are responsible, but in what situations can you problem solve together? Can you partner with them, come up with a solution together as opposed to just feeling like you have to have all the answers?
Yeah, and that's also gonna help the longevity of your relationship.
Yeah.
Especially this is a mindset for teens and tweens. I'm not saying talk to your 2-year-old about how you can do things
Yeah.
better. But your teens and tweens, they're gonna have really good ideas. They do interact with
Sure.
other kids and other parents. Not that you should compare yourself to them at all, but they're gonna be like, oh yeah, actually, my friend's mom lets them stay up until like 2 o'clock in the morning on Fridays, and I don't think that's a bad idea. Like, it could be small adjustments. And then if you think about it, back to that longevity piece, they're gonna leave your house one day. They're gonna be full grown adults. So if you can start having those conversations now, that problem solving, they'll come to you when they're in college, when they're starting their first jobs,
Mhm.
and be like, hey, this is what's going on. I'm not sure how to process this. Have you ever gone through that? They'll have that communication with you, and you'll have your kid kind of for longer. Not that they're going to disappear, but you could have start having more of a friendship at some point in the future instead of just a parent child relationship.
It's true because I look at friends of mine whose kids have launched, and I
Mhm.
love watching the relationships, that transpire once they leave the house, once they become adults. It says so much about the work they did when those kids were little and the relationship they established and,
Yeah.
how that manifests as an adult. So I think that's so incredible.
Yeah.
What questions should we be asking ourselves as parents? Because I know a lot of what you talk about is when we're responding from our old strategies or ingrained patterns. And this show, as you know, what the shift is all about breaking patterns and, shifting our strategy. So, what questions, and we touched upon this a little bit, but what questions should we really be thinking about or asking ourselves to notice when we are responding from those old patterns and strategies?
I would ask myself, or you could ask yourself, what triggered this feeling, this reaction? Is it does this happen every time? Has it become a pattern? Um, do I just when I'm stressed out, am I expressing it with anger? Or is there a way I can show that stress in a different manner? So ask yourself, what's the feeling? Ask yourself, how do I generally react to this feeling? And what can I do to improve? And sometimes it's okay that you bring on your partner, your friend, your child to hold you accountable. Be like, I am working on how I express my anger, my grief. If I do snap at you, please let me know, so because I am working on that. And a lot of people are going to support you, especially if you're trying to help that relationship.
Mhm. Yeah, that's incredible. And I think the other thing to think about is yes, there's books on parentings, but there really is no blueprint for parenting in the world we live in today. Our parents did the best they could with what they had, with what they knew. And when we know better, we do better. But the world is evolving very rapidly
Yes.
in many ways, and there's no blueprint to turn to and say, "Okay, this is how I need to do it," especially when it comes to things like technology and keeping your
Mhm.
kids, like, physically safe in the world we live in. It's just that it really is about figuring out what is best for your family and your kids. So I love that.
Right.
What would you, Nitza, say you want to leave our audience with? What's one piece of advice or one thought you want to leave our listeners with today?
And the reason I do this work is for parents, families to understand that they are okay, that you're doing your best and your best is good enough. And yes, there may be moments that you need to improve, but improving something doesn't mean you messed it all up, that it's going to hell in a handbasket. It just means that you notice you made a mistake or want to make an adjustment and you are going to change that. So give yourself some grace. You are trying your best. You are showing up for yourself and your child. And that really counts. And they see those moments and they're going to grow up realizing, wow, my mom, my dad did this. They talk this way and I can do that too. So you're leading by example and you're doing your best. That's it. Like just do your best. That's okay.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I kinda hear you saying is being intentional about it, as opposed to
Yes.
reactive or responsive, being really intentional about that parenting, and again, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's about how you show up,
Mm-mm.
how you repair, and having intention in the way you parent, so I think that's great advice. Nitsa, thanks
Thank
so much
you.
for being here, for sharing your story and your expertise. Where can our listeners find you if they're interested in learning more about you and the work that you do?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Nitza Jimenez. I post constantly on there. You'll find some links and some discovery calls and other resources I have available for you. And if you do find me on LinkedIn, please send me a message. I love having conversation and supporting however I can.
And that's how you and I connected, so I love
Yeah,
that.
it is.
Thank you again. So if this landed with you, share it with a friend who's having the same thoughts at 2 AM, and if you want more conversations like this, stick around because this is where we make shift happen. Take care. We'll see you next week. All right, shifters, before you jump back into your day or back into your thoughts, if something from this conversation stuck with you, that's not random. A shift doesn't happen because you push harder. It happens when you stop ignoring the thing that keeps coming back. So here's your only ask. If this episode made you think of someone, send it to them. That's how these conversations are spread. Quietly, honestly, person to person. This is What the Shift.